What's good, team? Welcome to today's tutorial where we're going to be building a web portfolio in HTML and CSS for all your projects to show to your employers. It's going to be absolutely excellent. So here's a quick demo of the project we're going to be building today. It's basically just a neat little portfolio with all of your projects and stuff like that. We have the links to the code. It's all working. Looks excellent. Got your social links. And it's pretty simple and straightforward to build. The only prerequisite is that you know a little bit of HTML and CSS. If you don't, there's some quick crash courses down in the description, so check those out. And if you enjoy the video, please like and sub, super helps. Let's get into it. So I'm just going to start off in my terminal, and the first thing I'm going to do is make a directory called dope portfolio. And now I'm going to cd into that folder, portfolio, and I'm going to open it up in my code editor. Now in here, we're going to need one file for this video. It's going to keep it nice and simple. And that is just going to be an index.html file. And then we're going to use the exclamation shorthand to get the basic boilerplate for our project. So that's pretty cool. Now there's two ways you can render this. I'm only going to do one, and for it you will need the extension live server. So just if you're using VS Code, look that up and give that an install. And what it means is that if we come into this file, we can right click and open with live server. And that's just going to open this page up for us in a neat little tab. And so here I could type James, and then we'll see that it automatically refreshes that document, that web document. So that's super cool. And now I guess we are ready to dive into the content. So the first thing we are going to do is change this to be your name. And in this case, I'm actually just going to say dev James like that. And in our body, we're going to need a basic HTML structure, and it's going to have a header. Underneath that, we're going to have the main section. And underneath that, we're going to need a footer section. And all of this is within the body. So that's super cool. Now in here, we're going to open up a style tag for all of our CSS styles. And the first thing we're going to do is select everything using the asterisk selector and type in border box, box sizing border box, just like that, margin 0 and padding 0. And you'll notice that when I save this, the exteriors go. And so it just kind of resets any default styling that the web page may have. So the next style we're going to do is just select the tag, the body tag, and give it a min height of 100% of the view height, and a display of flex and a flex direction of column. So that's super cool. And now the next thing we're going to do is in our main, we're going to have a bunch of sections, just like that. So let's just replicate that maybe 3 times. So we might have 3 sections in our main, and then we'll have a footer at the bottom. What we're also going to do is just have a little nav bar just in the top of our main, and that's when we scroll off our header introductory page, that will pop up there. And then we can come in and start styling these elements. And so the first one we can select is the header. And this one is also going to have a minimum height of 100% of the view height. In here, we're also going to set the background color to 0F172A, and we're going to give it a color of white. So that's just going to change the color of everything to this nice dark color. We will remove the James, and that's pretty good for our structure. So the next thing we're going to need in our project is to come over to Google Fonts, because we're going to want to add some better fonts to our document. And so for this project, the font that we're going to use is one called Just, and so I'm just going to select it in here. And now we are going to make this a little bit bigger, and we're going to select all of the non-italicized fonts, just like this. All the way right up to the most bold ones, just like that. And now with this link down here, if you can see it just there, we're going to select this link and come back into our document, and we're just going to paste it underneath the title, just like that. So nice and easy. And then in here we can come and say font family, and that is just going to be whatever that selector may be. So we can import it using this selected just there. So just like that, nice and easy. And so now that font will be applied to everything in our document. So if I just resize that, so we can check that that's working, because if I come into the header and type Haynes, we can see that that font has indeed been applied. And so that gives us the ability to style our header. So our header is going to occupy 100% of this view width, and we are going to give it a display of grid, and we're going to say place items center. And so this is just one way of centering content in the middle of the page. And in here, we're going to have a div, and so this div will be centered in the page, and we are going to have one h1 tag that says div, and another one that says James, just like that. And now we can come into our header and select that subdiv just like this, give it a display of flex, which is just going to place them together, and we can also say gap of 10 pixels. Maybe even we could go, let's say 20 pixels. Now we're also just going to select this first h1 tag by saying header div h1 first child, like that, and we are going to give it some special fonts. So we're going to say dash webkit dash text dash fill color. We're going to say transparent, so that's going to make it completely transparent, and we're going to add another line that says webkit text stroke, and we're going to say 1 pixel and white, just like that. And so we can see that that actually doesn't work, and the solution to that is that we're going to come back into our document just here, and we're going to add another font, and it's going to be Oswald. So if you just click on Oswald, what we can do is come in and we just want some of the more bold ones. So let's say 400, 500, 600, 700, just like that. And that's going to add them. And so we're just going to recopy this link tag, paste it back in here over all of that. And now for our header div, specifically, we're just going to apply that font family to everything inside. So font family is equal to, and we're going to use that Oswald, and provide a sans serif backup just like that. And now that didn't apply, and that's because what we actually want to do is just have header h1, target both of them and move it into there specifically. And now when I save that, we can see that both of those have changed over as they should. So the next thing we're going to want to do is increase the font size. And keep in mind that when I'm starting this design, I'm designing for a mobile device specifically. So we're going to do the small screen into the big screen. But in here we can say font size, and we can do 2 rem, 4 rem. Yeah, a bit bigger, just like that. That doesn't look too bad. I'm also going to increase the stroke to 2 pixels, maybe 1.5, just like that. I might just make that bigger once more, so I might do 5 rem. Yeah, cool. That looks pretty neat. And now what we can also do to just confirm that is if we inspect, we can click on this mobile device and make sure that it fits, and it does. Maybe want to bring it down just a tiny bit. We could go 4.6 rem, and that is good. And so this is going to be the first thing that people see when they come to our page. Now underneath that, we're going to have a secondary div, and I'm actually going to change that to an unordered list, just like that, so we can have some list items. But notice that it actually pushed this content off the center of the page. And to fix that, what we're going to do is instead of using grid place item center, we're going to say display flex, justify content center, and align items center. So that's just how we can center content with flex instead. And in this unordered list, we're going to have all of our nav items, so we can have a list item just like that. And in here, we're going to have an anchor, and you'll see why soon. And this anchor might say about me, just there. And then after that, we could have another one. So let's just copy that. Projects, And then finally, we might have one about experience. So we'll put that in between, and we'll just put that in here, and we'll say experience, work experience. Cool, so that's good. Obviously, the next thing is that we don't want it there, and so we can come back into our header, and just here, it's currently the default display for flex is row, and so it's trying to line it all up into a row. And so we can say flex direction column, just like that, and that will place it underneath. And then what we can do here is select that header unordered list and give that a display of flex because we want them all to be in order. We can give it a align item center so that they're all centered. We can say gap maybe 10 pixels. Spread them out a bit. We could even go maybe 20 pixels. And then we can also select the list item, so ULLI, because we're not going to want the bullet point, and we can get rid of it by saying list style type and just go none. And that will remove that point there, so that's cool. Now we're going to also have to style this text, and so we can just say font size, maybe want it a tiny bit smaller, so we could say 0.8 EM. That's probably too small, maybe 0.9 EM, just like that. For the whole container, we might just add a padding of 0 horizontally and maybe 10 pixels vertically. I think I got that. Of 10 pixels vertically and 0 horizontally, just like that. Honestly, maybe not. I almost don't mind it how it was, just like that. We're going to have to add some hover effects, but we can do that in a second. Currently, I don't like how we can select this text, so we're just going to say user select none. And here what we're going to do for these is say user select is also none. The cursor is going to be a pointer so that when we hover over it, we get the pointer cursor. We're also going to add a transformation, and for the transformation, if we come up here, we want to add a transformation duration of the same amount to everything. So we can say transition duration of 300 milliseconds, and that will apply it to everything. And now what we can do is select this header ULLI hover, and what we're going to want is a little line that comes across at the bottom. And so for that, we're actually going to use an after element. So we're going to say position of relative on the list item. And then we can say header ULLI after. And what we want is a position absolute. So it's going to be an absolute unit. We need to add the content of nothing. We're going to say width, so it occupies the full width. The height is going to be 1 pixel. The background is going to be white. The left is going to be, the right is going to be 100%. You'll see why shortly. The bottom is going to be 0, and that's not showing up because that should be 100%. So now we can see that we have all these lines for each of them. And in this element here, we're going to say overflow hidden. So that's going to remove them. But now on the hover of that element for the after But now when we hover over the list item, we want to select the after effect. We're going to say transition, transform, translate X 100%. And so now what we're going to do is get this effect here. So it's going to show up. However, the only thing that we're missing is we also have to come in here and say transition duration 300 milliseconds. So now we just get something like that, which looks super neat. And that's going to be our little menu. Obviously on a bigger screen we're going to size up, but we'll do that in a second. So that is our first page. Now the next thing we're going to have to do is come into these sections here. And these sections are going to have IDs. And so this one is going to be about me. This one is going to be ID equals experience. And finally this one here is ID equals projects. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to have these anchor selectors click and navigate us to this. So this can have an href of equal to slash, actually hash about me. So we target the ID, and this one can have an href equals hash experience. And this one can have one of hash projects. And so now when we have those elements, clicking on them will take us to them. The one other thing obviously we can see is that the anchor is giving it a funny effect. So we're just going to have to target the anchors in the header and just say color inherit and text decoration none. Just like that. And so that fixes all of that. And so we're back to normal. Now, that's pretty much the opening page. The next thing we can do is start styling the main. And so for that, we're going to start off by targeting the sections. And for each section, we're going to give it a min height of 100% of the view height. And so what that's going to do is just give each of them that height. And so now when I click on them, it's going to take me to each relevant section. Now we can also come in here and just say scroll behavior smooth. And what that's going to mean is that when I click this, it's going to just naturally scroll us down the page like that, which is just a neat little effect. The other thing we're going to want is have interchanging background colors. And so in here, what we're going to do is say section nth child to n. So this is going to be every second n child. And we are going to say background is going to be white. And the color of the text is going to be hashtag that same unit code that we used before. And now it's just going to interchange the background colors like that. And so we can scroll through it all just like this, and it looks nice and neat and pretty. Cool. And so it just gives it a bit of, like, I guess, texture almost, and a modern minimalistic design. So now that we have all of these in place, we're going to come to this nav at the very end, but the next one we can start styling out is this about me section. And so the first thing we're going to have in here is an H2 heading that just says about me. So obviously the user knows where they are. And we are going to give this a class name of section header. And so now I can come up here and title and target my section header using the period and just say that we want text align to be center so that it's centered in the page. We want text transform to be uppercase. And the other thing that we're going to do is also use the same font family that we have for the parent element, and that is just that one there. And so just like that, now we have our section header. So now for the section header, we're also going to have an interesting effect. And so I'm going to say position relative. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I'm going to have some before and after effects. So we're going to say section header before, and we're also going to target the section header after, just like that in here. And we're going to give these a position of absolute. So we give the relative to the parent so that it knows where it's going to fit. We're going to say width 100%, height is going to be 1 pixel. And for the moment, what I'm going to do is give them a background of green so that we can see that it's working. Now, currently it has no context as to where it sits, and we also have to give it a content of an empty string. But now you can actually see it show up just in there like that. And so the next thing we're going to do is target the section header, specifically just the before. And we're going to give it a right of 0 and a top of 0, just like that. And then we will be able to see it if we come in here and give this a margin of 10 pixels and 0, just like that. And so that's going to pull it down a bit. Now, obviously we can't currently see it. And so what we're going to do to resolve that is just say padding of 4 pixels just all around. And so there we can see it show up just like that. And I might even just jump that up to about a 10 pixel padding. So that is the before. Now, if we copy that same thing for the after, except this time it's going to be left is 0 and the bottom is 0. And so that's going to have that effect just there. Now, obviously, they're both currently taking up the full occupied width. And so what we're going to do to resolve that, the reason they do that is because this header occupies that entire width. And I actually don't mind that as an effect. But the alternative would be to, instead of saying text align center, what we could do is say with fit and give it a margin of 0 auto. So that's going to give it a 0 vertical margin, but a horizontal margin on either side like that. And that would work if I actually used fit content. So now the width is going to be specific to the width of the containing elements, and the margin on either side is going to be like that. Now that sizes the element perfectly to fit. However, the last thing is to change this width to the view width. And so now we get this kind of fun effect that goes out either side. We could even come in here and just add a padding, and that could be 0 vertically, or maybe you could do 4 pixels and then 10 pixels like that. And that's just going to make it a bit more significant, just like that. So you could do this or have the full cross-align effect. In this particular case, we get this overflow here, and so to resolve that, what we're just going to have to say is overflow hidden. And instead of applying that here, we will apply that to this section just here. So now there's no overflow on the page, and we get this kind of funky little effect. But honestly, I almost prefer how we had it before we did any of that. So I might go back to that original style and remove all of these things and just have that header like that. I think that's quite cool. So now we have this little about me section. So now the next thing we're going to have to do is come in and change these background colors, because green is not going to be acceptable. And so the way that we're going to do that is set a default color to background of our favorite unit. And so that will change that to match. But we can see that if we come in here and add the same thing to our next section that says experience, it's not going to show up with those relevant colors. And the way that we can deal with that is just by adding in a similar effect up here. So just like how we've had that, we select that section. It's going to be nth child to n. And then after that, we're going to select the dot section header before. And we're going to duplicate that line for the after. Open that up, and in here what we're going to have is a background color of white. Now that didn't work, and I think that the reason that didn't work is because we're going to have to change that to a +1. And so we can see that that has worked perfectly. And so basically what it's doing is it's selecting every second section, and it's going to alternate that color just like that. So now we get that nice little alternating effect. And so we can prove that it works by coming into our third section here and adding in projects, just like that. And so now projects has that dark theme just like we want it to. Cool, so that's super neat. And so now we can scroll down to these relevant sections just as we would hope we could. So now after we have that section, what we're going to do is have a div, and this is where we're going to have all of our content. And so in here, what you could do is have class section content, just like that. And I'm going to collapse the header for a second, and we can come up here and target that section content. And what we're going to do is give it a width of 100% of the page. We're going to give it a maximum width of 65 characters. Actually, let's go 75 characters, and we're going to give it a margin of 0 vertically and auto horizontally. And what that means is that if I have content in a particular section, let's say I have blah blah blah, Now it lines up perfectly over here, but when I come onto a big page, it's just going to stay centered in the middle just as we'd want it to. And honestly, we probably want that same effect on our top little thing just here. And so what we could do to achieve that is on our section header, we could have the same thing. So we could have width as 100%, max width is, in this one we could do 85 characters, and margin is 0 auto. And so what that means is that when we come out onto a bigger screen, it's just going to max out at a particular width and still have all of the centered content. So the next thing we're going to do is just have some padding around of this text just here. And to achieve that, we are going to do a few things. The first thing is come up to our section, and we're going to give this a display of flex and a flex direction of column. So that's not immediately going to change anything, but if we come in here and add a gap of 10 pixels, it's just going to spread out our units a little bit more. The next thing we're going to do on our section content is give it a flex of 1, and so that's just going to mean that it's going to occupy as much of that content as it can. So if our section is this entire height, it's going to take up this whole thing here, and we can prove that by adding a background of green yellow, and you can see that it just wants to occupy as much of that space as it possibly can. And that's good because that's going to allow us to give it this a display of flex, a justify content center, and an align items center, and that's just going to put everything smack bang in the center for us. Now inside of our section content, we're going to have a secondary div, and this is where all the good stuff is going to come. And so I might actually just change this to section wrapper, just like that, because it's going to wrap our section. And now in here, what you can do is write whatever you like about yourself. You could have a couple of paragraphs, so we could have a P like that. And then here we could say banana, telephone, have a whole sentence. Now obviously that is centered and we don't necessarily want that, and so what we can do to change that is have a section content, and we can also make sure that this has a width of 100%, and we can do a text align left so that the text sits to the left. Now that didn't do anything because we have to apply that class. Now that didn't do anything because we actually haven't applied that class, but another way that we could actually achieve the same thing is instead by commenting out that line. Now that is just automatically going to sit to the left, just as you might hope it would. So in here you could, once again, as I was saying, have a whole lot of paragraphs or whatever. For this particular one, you could have a text align that was actually center. So now that would, once again, center your content if I actually applied the class. So class section content, and just make sure that I actually target the P element within the section content. And I think what I'm actually going to do is just reset some of this stuff. So here I am going to re-enable this line. So we have these 3 displays, and then here what I'm going to do is just come back and set this width to 100%, because now we can say text align center and the text will be centered if we so wish it to be. And in this particular case, I think that we do. And so in here what we can do is, as I mentioned, have a couple of paragraphs. So you could duplicate this 4 times or something like that, have 4 different paragraphs. You know, you could replicate that text a whole lot. And if I just remove those, I mean, that's probably a bit much really. Let's just remove a whole bunch of stuff. Doesn't really matter if you have too much because it will just flow over. Now, the one other thing is that these paragraphs aren't spaced out very well, and so we just want to once again come in here and give this a display of flex, a flexed direction of column, and we're going to say a gap of 10 pixels. And so now they're just going to sit slightly further apart. Honestly, you could even make that 20 pixels just so it's a bit more significant. And you could have whatever you want in here, and it's just a nice little about me section. And so now we can click on About Me, and it's just going to take them in beautifully like that, and they get to see everything there is about you. The next section we're going to do is our work experience. Now this section is going to be a bit more interesting And so in here, I'm going to once again make a div and give that a class of section wrapper. And in here, I'm going to have the same div, except this time I think what we're going to do, no, I think we'll do the same thing. So we're going to have the class of section content, except in this particular case, it's going to be specific to our work experience. And so the first thing we're going to do is have a header div. And so this is going to have a class of experience header. And so if we come up here, we can target .experience header. And this is going to have a display of flex, align items, center, and a justify of space between. And so that's going to push it to either end of that particular unit. And we can see exactly what is happening, because if I give this a height of 10 pixels, a width of nothing for the second, and a background of green, we can see that that naturally occupies the entire width, which is just what we want it to. And so now when I add elements in here, so the first thing I'm going to do is have an H2, and this is going to be the job title. So for me, it might be full stack developer. Now we have that show up just there. We want to remove this background green for the second. The next thing that we're going to do is actually come up here and just make one more minor adjustment. So this is instead going to be flex direction of column. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to have text align left, so that that sits to the left. We're going to remove this height element. And now we're going to have a secondary div underneath. And this one is going to be experience subheader. And so now what we can do is go .experience subheader, and this one is going to be the display flex, align item center, and justify content space between, so that's going to push them apart. And in here we can have a p tag that has your role, that has the name of the company, so this might be banana, pole, or whatever, just like that. And then we can have another p that has the duration of your tenure, and so that might be, you know, the 11th of the 12th until now. And so we can see that that just really nicely pushes that content to the other side. Now the other thing we're going to do for the subheader is just give it a different color of, instead of it being white, we're going to go F1, F5, F9, which obviously wasn't significant enough, so maybe instead we will try 94A3B8. Maybe that's actually too dark, so we might just go for one in between, which is CBD5E1. Yeah, and I think that's cool. So it just puts slightly more emphasis on this top element here, which itself will have to come down in size in just a moment, but we will deal with that. Probably, actually, no, let's just deal with it now. So the next thing we're going to do is come in here and say font size, and we're going to go 0.8 EM. So that's going to bring everything down a bit, which I think just looks a little bit better. And in here, I might just say nothing, because instead what I'll do is I'll make an experience header and target that H2, and we're just going to say font weight is maybe 500, so it's not as bold as it is now. Just like that. And so that's probably just a more natural sizing, so that it doesn't take too much contrast off the header there. So now that we have that, we can come back into the section content. So that's the experience header. And then in here, you could have, you know, a pretty brief paragraph about whatever you did. So in this particular case, it might be, you know, I made a full stack SaaS platform with all sorts of crazy features. Give that a full stop, and the other thing we're going to need to do is actually just copy this and paste it in there instead, because we want that to sit directly to the left just like that. Now, there's possibly a bit much of a gap, and that's because I think it's in the wrong element. And so instead what we want to do is wrap it around each particular, and so I might just comment that out for the second because I don't know that we necessarily need it immediately. And so now that's just going to come in a bit snug, a bit more small and fitted, just like that. So let's just say for the sake of efficiency, we duplicate this. So we're going to duplicate all of these elements, let's say 3 times 3 rows. Now, obviously they're sitting very snug and tight together. And so what we're going to do is in here, just make a new div and give this a class of resume and wrap everything in it, just like that. So now what we can do is come up to resume, and we're just going to put it underneath section content just like that. Actually, we're going to change the class to resume item. And in here, we're just going to wrap that whole individual item. And so we're going to repeat that around each of them. So close that div and then move it down to the bottom of the paragraph. And then do the same thing again, Control V, Control C that, close it, and then move it down to the bottom of the paragraph. And so what that's going to allow us to do is come back up here and reintroduce that gap. And now it's just going to hold these items together a bit better. So that is looking pretty decent for now. Obviously you could do more. And the last thing I might just do is in the resume item. So if we just go .resume item, and I'm just going to select the P and give it a padding of maybe 4 pixels vertically and 0 horizontally. And I think that was actually way too much, so I might just make that 2. But it's actually targeting these paragraphs here, and we actually don't want that. We just want the paragraph that is the direct descendant of the resume item, and so we can achieve that by just popping in this little less than. And so now it won't target these paragraphs, it will just target this one here and give it a little bit more space. So I think that's pretty good. The only other thing we could do is just ever so slightly dim this as well. So we could give this a color of Alice blue, and that's just going to once again keep the attention on the role and just give you some contrast between the 3 of them. Now in the descriptions I'd recommend you talk about the technologies that you've used or anything relevant, and you can obviously have more than 1 paragraph, so that's totally chill. But now we're going to come on to the best section for last, which is projects. And so in here we have the section header, and as per usual we're going to take these 2 divs just here, section wrapper and section content. And actually I lie, we're not going to do section content, we're just going to stick with the wrapper. Open that up. So the section wrapper just takes the full width, max width, and centers everything. And so in here, what we're going to do is create another div, and this is going to have a class of project grid. And now we can open that up. And I can also just close this experience section and close this section just here. And so now we can say dot project grid, just check what space it's currently occupying by saying green. So currently it's not occupying any space. So let's say I say height 10 pixels. Nothing. And what about width 10 pixels? Width 100%, let's say. Okay, so now if we add the width, we can see it gets the entire thing. So that just shows us that the only style we're going to need is the width. And so in here we're going to use a display of grid. And the default we're going to do is grid template columns, repeat 1 min max 0 1 fraction. And so this is just going to be a little grid that we're going to have all of our projects. Now in here what we're going to need is to have a screenshot of each project, and then on bigger screens we're going to increase the div size. And so in here we can just say div, and this is going to have a class of project item. So now that we have that project item, what I'm actually going to do is just copy over my 3 images into a folder here, and I'm just going to call this public. And this is where we can store all of our public assets. And so in my particular case, I have 3 images that I'm going to paste in there. And so now what we can do is just open this up and say image source is equal to /public/ whatever image you may have. So just like that, I'm going to give it an alt of whatever the image is, just like that. And we can close that tag. And just like that, the image is coming up onto the page. Now we are going to have to do some resizing because obviously it's huge, but we'll get there in a second. But the moral of the story is that now we can duplicate that 3 times and just copy these out. So this one might be RM, and then this one might be MG, I think it was. And so now we can come into here and say dot project grid and sub-select the image, just like that, and say width is 100%, just like that. And so now we have 3 kind of responsive images, which is pretty neat. So that looks pretty good. So the next thing we're going to do is come back into our project grid and just add a gap of 10 pixels. So that's going to just spread out the images a bit. And then we've wrapped them in a project item tag. So we can say dot project item, just like that, and we can give it a border of 1 pixel solid, and then use our special thing, and we can say padding of 4 pixels. And so what that's going to do is just have a nice neat little border surrounding each of our images. The other thing we want is to say object fit cover, and that's just going to stretch our images so that they all fit perfectly within their containers. And I think that will actually allow us to remove that width out. Nope, we'll need to keep the width. What we could also do is just have a display flex, align items center, and a justify center. And what that's going to do is just mean that they're all perfectly centered within that space. Another option, instead of using the border, would be to add a box shadow, which I think is actually what I might do instead of just say 0. Actually, we could say 3 pixels, 3 pixels, 3 pixels, and 3 pixels, and use that same color. And now that's obviously way too intense, so I'm going to change that to 1 and 2, just like that. And instead I'm going to do, honestly, just 0 and 0. So that's the X and Y coordinates, and then this is the spread and the blur. So I think if we just swap those, so make that 2 and make that 1, it should be a bit better. We could even make this 4. And instead of doing this color, we could just say light gray. So now we just have a really nice little edge to it, just like that. So each of them is kind of like a neat little card. And then I actually think it might look better without the padding, so it will just have the image with the shadow around the image, just like that. And it just kind of makes the image stand out a little bit. So that is excellent. And now when you come down onto a smaller screen, you can see that the projects just fit inside their parent containers as you'd hope that they would. We could possibly also just make that a 2, make the shadow a tiny bit more severe. And that's kind of what you're looking at. So now we've got our projects. So the next thing that we want is to have some text overlay on each of them. And so the way that that's going to work is we're going to use an absolute item, and then here we're going to say position relative, because we're going to include a div after here, and this div is going to have a class of image text, just like that. And now we can select that by saying image text. We can say position absolute, bottom 0, left 0, width full, which is 100%. And in here we're going to give it a background of linear gradient to bottom, and it's going to be transparent at the top, and it's going to be our favorite color at the bottom, which is 0F172A. Now you won't be able to see it immediately, but if I come in here and add some text in to this particular element, so let's add it in here, hello banana, and let's say I put that onto a break, onto a new line, hello, we get this nice little gradient down the back that's just going to make our text stand out a whole lot more. We can increase the size of that by adding a padding of maybe like 8 pixels. And so that's just going to be a padding all around, and so now we get that little gradient down the bottom. Now the other thing that we're going to want is to maybe make that 12 pixels and also just change the text color. So you could try white, which to be fair, you can kind of see it, so that's actually not too bad. And this is just going to have a display of flex and align items center and a justify content space between, so it's going to push them to either end. And so now this is going to be a paragraph tag that's essentially the header, so the name of it. So this one is called Swolger Fitness. And I might even just make that uppercase, so we could target that and say up .img text, and let's say maybe instead of a paragraph I change this to an H3. How does that look? That's probably too bold, but we can fiddle with that in a second. We could say H3 font weight is 400 standard, text transform uppercase, just like that. And you know what, we could even use that initial font that we use for the header just to really switch it up a little bit. So wherever we have that Oswald, might just make it slightly more interesting. So we get Swolger Fitness down the bottom, just like that. Looks pretty good, I think. And then down the other end, we're going to have links to it. So in this particular case, it will be, I might actually just change this to 12 pixels, maybe 20 pixels, and then 12 horizontally. Just so it's a bit bigger. And then down the other end, we're going to have a div that has our links. And so in here, we're going to give this a class of project links. And so project links is going to have the first div, which is going to be a link to the source code. So in here, I could just say source, and then I can duplicate that, and the next one is going to be live. And so I can go .project links, open that up, say display flex, align items center, justify content center, and a gap of maybe 8 pixels. And so now we can just see that we have source and live down the far end, which looks excellent. Going to make that really bold. I'm also just going to bring the font sizes down here. So I'm going to say font size in the image text and just say 0.9 EM. So that's going to be a relative margin. I could even come down to, actually that's probably not too bad, just like that. Is that all right? Let's try 700 on the font weight, just so it's a little thinner. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. And now the other thing that we just want to do is for a project item, we just want to have a hover effect. So we're going to have a .project item hover. And we're just going to increase the box shadow to more of a dark gray, possibly. Let's see how that looks. You can't really see it here, but if I make it a bit bigger, when you hover, you can. We could even make it bigger, so you can make this 4 and you can make this 8, possibly. Now when you hover over, you just get slightly more of an effect. You could either do that, or you could add in a border for some kind of hover effect, but I actually don't mind that, to be honest. I think that's all right. The shadow just gets larger. I might also just make this like 12 pixels. Now you can really feel that you're hovering over it. If we come up onto a really big screen, you get that kind of intense hover effect. Except that is the wrong way around, that's why it's looking funky. So that's 4 and 2. That should be 14 and like 4. No, that's way too big though, so let's just bring that down to an 8 and maybe make that a 3. Yeah, that's pretty good. So now you get a nice little hover effect when you hover over it. It's probably even still a bit big, so maybe go 5. Gets a bit darker. Now we have the name. We'll come and fiddle with the font size in just a minute. So now we have to do something with these project links. So we're going to say cursor pointer user select none. So now when we hover over them like that, and we're also going to say background of light. I'm actually going to say background of use our color, just like that. And for them, no, that's not going to work. I'll have to move that somewhere else. So it's actually going to be .project links div, because that's the division inside. And so this is where we want these elements. And so now we can see that they have a slight differentiation. And we also want a padding of 0 vertically and maybe 4 pixels horizontally. Just like that. Which is not too bad. Equally, what we could do is we could actually just go display grid. And we can use that same grid layout we used earlier. And we can use a slightly similar grid layout to earlier. So grid template columns. And this is going to be repeat to min max 0 1 fraction, just like that. And so the benefit of that is that it's just going to mean that both of them are the exact same size. We could drop the gap down to about 4 pixels. We can say text align center. No, I won't do that. And in here what we can do is have a display of flex align items center justify content space between. And now in our links, I can actually put this inside of a paragraph tag, just like that. And the same just here. Copy that, move it to the end. And we can come to font awesome icon CDN, click on this, copy this top link tag and paste it into the very top of our document, just there. And what that means is that we can come into font awesome icons. Let's just look font awesome. Font awesome icons just here. And I can make this big and we can say code and we're going to select this. So when we come down to our div here, we can have the source and have that icon there. And then if I come to our lightning, we can use the bolt for the live code and paste that in just afterwards. So this should actually be afterwards. That's my mistake. Just like that. And now when I come into our div James, we can see that we have these cute little icons just sitting in there like that, which is nice and neat. Now we possibly just want to size them down a little bit. So we can say .project links icon font size 0.8 em. Should bring them down. And we can just give them a padding left of 2 pixels. Worst case. Just like that. So now we have a little source and a little live button. I might actually just increase this padding here to 6 and 2 pixels, that should be. And I think I'm just going to add a slight gap of 2 pixels also. And maybe just remove that instead. Honestly, you know what? I might actually just revert to having that display flex. Align items, center, and a justify content between. Well, actually, we don't even need this line, to be honest. And that would just mean that the buttons only occupy their size, and then we could increase this gap to maybe like 6 pixels, or even 8. Nope, whoops, that's the wrong one. 2 there, and increase this gap to about 6 pixels. So now we have these cute little buttons. The other thing we might just do is drop the font weight to 300, so it's a bit thinner. 400. And I might also just lowercase the source and the live, just so it's like that, source and live. And now we have these cute little buttons. And then what we can do is add a hover effect. And so here we can just have a .project links div hover. We can have transform scale 1.1. And obviously a cursor pointer that's already there. Cool. And so now what that just means is that when we hover over them, we just get that little sizing thing, but it might just mean that I have to increase the gap to maybe about 4 pixels instead. Yeah, so now we just get a cute little scaling effect when you want to click on it. You've got the header of the project, the source code, the live. Kind of builds curiosity, and now we can just add that to the rest of them. And the other thing we'll want to do is change this to an anchor tag, because we're going to have to add some href, so that will just be like that. Should be the exact same thing. Also have to change that one to an anchor tag. So it's the exact same thing, and now when we click on it, it's going to take us out to the project. And so an example of that would be, here I can have the href equals, https://www.swoljafitness.com. And so now when I click on the live code, it's actually going to take us to that project. However, what we will also need to add is a target equals underscore blank, so that it opens up in a new tab. And we're also just going to have to set the color to white, so that it is permanently white, and the text decoration none. Remove that little underline. And so now we'll have these links that opens up your project link, and then the same for the source code, so that will be like the GitHub repository. Since it is white, I might also just add the font weight 300 and remove that line there. So it's a little thinner. We have that down the bottom. That looks super neat. And now if you come down onto a small mobile screen as well, it also looks appropriate, and you've got your little sections and stuff like that, which is excellent. So now we can copy that logic. So it's just going to be this div here to the rest of them. So it's going to be the image text, just like that. We can copy and paste that in there, and copy and paste that in there. And so now we have these overlays on each of them. What you could also do, just to make it slightly more obvious, is for the project links A, you could have a border of 1 pixel solid white, so that it actually just differentiates them a little bit more, which once again I actually think looks awesome. That looks excellent. And so if we come back, we get that nice little hover effect. So now the very last thing you'll be wanting to add to your project is a footer. And so footers are pretty easy. All we're going to do is come up here and target the footer, and we're going to have a display of flex, justify content, center, align items, center, padding of maybe 10 pixels vertically, and it doesn't matter horizontally, just like that. And in here, what we're going to do is have a series of anchor tags to all of your relevant links. So href is equal to, in this case, I'm just going to go with a hash. Let's say you have 3 of them. And in this one, I'm going to, for example, have LinkedIn. We're going to copy that, paste that in there. The next one we're going to have is maybe you have a code pen that you want them to look at, just like that. And the last one might be a GitHub. Always important. So we paste that in there just like that. And now if we come back and look, we will see we have these 3 little icons here. So we're going to just add a gap of 20 pixels. spread them out a little bit. And then for the footer anchor icons, we're going to say the color is going to be white, just like that. And now we're going to have some text decoration, none, not that you really needed it. You could possibly make the font size bigger, so we're going to say font size is 1.2M, just like that, so they stand out a bit more. And now we're going to have a footer anchor hover effect that is just going to be transform rotate 360 degrees, just like that, and maybe also a cursor pointer. So now what's going to happen is when they go and hover over your little things, you get that little twisting, but maybe that's actually too much. So what I might do is change that to 45 degrees and just add an opacity of 0.5. So the opacity works, and we have to add the degrees back. So now when you hover, you get that little rotation, which is pretty cool, to be honest. I might just make it negative 45 degrees, but because for some reason I have a preference to rotating the other way. Cool, and so now we have a great little footer. And so for the footer, you can just, once again, as I said, add in your LinkedIn links just like that. Now, that is pretty much it. The last thing you're going to want to do is obviously host it. So we're going to come over to Netlify, and you'll want to create yourself an account and log in and do all of that great stuff. And then the next thing we're going to do is click add a new site, and we're going to deploy manually. Now we're going to come into here, and we're going to reveal this file in the Finder. So I have it here, and now what we're going to do is copy all of this and paste it in here. And equivalently, you could just go to the browser to upload, and so that's what I'm going to do. .portfolio, upload that whole folder, upload. And so now that is just going to be deploying your site. We can see what it's actually doing. The site is actually live, and so now we can open up the publish deploy, and congrats, you literally have your project live. You could add that into anything. Reminds me, we're actually not quite done. The last thing we have to do is increase some of these font sizes for bigger screens. Now, I think that should be pretty straightforward. So the first thing we're going to do is our header page. And so if we come up here and add a media query, well, actually, typically media queries go at the bottom. So we're going to come in here and go media, and we're going to say min width for this to apply is 640 pixels. And then we're just going to size up a whole lot of text. So in here we can, everywhere we've sent a font size. So header 1. So we're going to copy that, paste it in here, and that is going to open up to be maybe font size of, we could go 6. Let's do 6 EM. Let's try that. So that's now, a little bit bigger. And then when we come down onto a smaller screen, it jumps down again. And it fits onto mobile as well. So that's pretty good. Did these come up? I'm not sure. Yeah, they definitely increased in size. No, they totally didn't. I lie. So they are going to be the section header anchor tags. So that's going to be these ones. And so we can once again come in here and add that underneath. Anchor, close that. And in here we can say font size 1.3 EM. But that's too big, so let's say 1.1 EM. So that looks pretty good. I honestly almost didn't mind them so small. So I'm actually not going to change those ones because I think they look pretty good just as they are, even on the bigger screen. It's nice to almost have them a bit smaller. The one thing we could possibly do is increase the spacing between them a little bit. So we can do that by selecting that UL. So that's going to be header UL. We can say gap 20 pixels. Let's say 100 pixels. Okay, so that's way too much. So let's say 40. So now they're just a bit further apart. We come onto a smaller screen, everything sizes down. I think that's pretty neat. The next font we're going to want is to upsize all of the section headers. So we can say .section header font size is 1.8 M. Did that not work for us? Let's have a look. What is it? So if we look at a section, the section header is the about me. So I think it did get better, but we could even go even bigger and say like 2.4. So now it's just nice and large. Come down to on a smaller screen and it drops down. It's pretty good. So now for the section content, we're going to have to increase that size. So we're going to say .section content font size 1.2 EM, which is definitely too big. So we could just say 1.05. Or actually, honestly, even just 1, because I think we may have sized it down earlier. So that looks reasonable. I think that's pretty good. And then the last thing we're going to want to size up is the footer icons. So we can just say footer a font size, 1.3 EM. So now they're just a bit bigger. Maybe we increase the footer padding as well. So we could say footer padding is maybe 24 pixels and 0 pixels. So now it's just possibly too big. Let's go to 20. So now that's like that. That's probably not too bad. You could increase these sizes just here as well. Honestly, you could increase that whole row. So let's see what that is. That is in the projects. We can look at it just down here. So that's the image text. So we can select the image text. Image text font size 1.1 EM. We'll probably go with 1. That's fine. And then we just want to get the image text. What was it? It was image text H3. We're just going to say font size 1.2 EM. So now that should increase this font size, but it doesn't seem to be wanting to work for us. So let's just try that once more. Let's say 1.9. Is that massive? Okay, that's much bigger. Honestly, that doesn't even look too bad. I might just make it 1.7. Just like that. So now we have that nice big. And so that, my friends, is pretty much it. You now have a fully live portfolio. You know how to upload it. It looks absolutely excellent. I hope it helps you land every job that you could possibly ever want and desire. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.